1. Background. At the time, I worked on an on-site desktop support team of about 13 people. These are your IT guys that typically wander around your workplace and go fix your computer in person. I had done this job for about a year before the pandemic hits. The Rona hits, and of course 95% of my job's workforce is either moved to entirely remote work or a hybrid schedule. Now, what does that mean for a primarily on-site second-tier IT support team? Well, for one, it means a lot of our workload is shifted to being remote work. Secondly, it means that if something did need a hands-on support, we'd need to schedule that user to come into the office. And thirdly, it means a lot of larger projects come to a grinding halt. Now, transitioning a workforce of thousands to remote work on a dime was, for all intents and purposes, a nightmare. We had to distribute thousands of laptops amidst multiple supply chain breakdowns, and teach a pretty aged workforce how to use VPNs. Needless to say, we absolutely rocked it despite all the hurdles. We spent a year plus of the pandemic managing hybrid schedules. Basically, for that entire time period, each one of us was on site at least 2 full days a week, and then coming in for an hour or two at a time for appointments with users, if they didn't fit into our normal days. This worked out for everyone. Almost none of our users were ever regularly on site. We always had 2 or 3 people in the office at any given time for emergencies, and we smashed through ticket queues. Our team was heaped with praise on all sides. But this wouldn't be a malicious compliance story if that was the case now, would it? Malicious compliance. So after having rocked support IT during a pandemic and receiving praise from every department, management remembers a project that we've been putting off, lifecycle replacement, LCR. Lifecycle replacement is the fancy IT term for replacing computers when they get too old. We were supposed to start a massive LCR right before the pandemic, but due to some rather ridiculous moves on the part of Manglement, they dissolved the lifecycle team into the desktop IT. It got delayed. Now they are in full panic mode and demanding massive quotas of LCRs are completed each week, despite 2 mitigating factors. 1, we are not receiving enough computers in the first place to meet those quotas. 2, it's hard to force masses of employees who've had a taste of work-life balance to come into the office to replace a whole computer with their whole working lives on them. So quotas are not being met, and Manglement is being a sweat because their bosses are wondering why this thing that was supposed to be finished a year ago is barely even starting. Manglement decides that clearly desktop is to blame, and thus sent out an edict that we are all to be on site 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, or else. Now, unfortunately, our whole team had gotten used to not having to pay for parking downtown every day. And we had realized that if the whole rest of the workforce is still working remotely, that us being in an empty building every day was completely pointless. We voiced our concern to one supervisor who, being the dutiful mouthpiece of our mangler, immediately set up a meeting with the whole team and themselves. The meeting went a little like this. So we're a little confused about this edict you've sent out that we have to be on site a full day every day. You guys have been praising our hard work throughout the pandemic, and I think we've shown we can responsibly manage hybrid schedules. With people moving back into offices, we've determined there's a greater need to have the team on site. And with the ticket backlog, we need to make sure the manpower is there to support the staff. But the backlog is due to us not having the equipment to distribute to the employees, as well as the majority of employees still working off-site. There's nobody around for us to regularly support. Well, unfortunately, these positions were always meant to be an on-site position. So will you and the supervisor be on site all week as our main line of support? Our job positions don't necessitate us to be on site, so we'll be coming in as needed. To address your point about ticket counts, I wanted to point out that if I pulled completed tickets for pre-April pre-pandemic and April during the pandemic, and we actually completed more tickets working a hybrid schedule. Look, this was meant to be an on-site position. If you don't like it, then there are plenty of other teams who offer remote work. So if we don't want to pay for gas and parking downtown every day, we're free to find other positions in the company that fit our needs better. If you want to discuss this further, then you can schedule a time to come and meet with me when I'm in the office next Wednesday. Needless to say, the entire team was furious. We had rocked the pandemic, been told how efficient we were, and then we were punished because Manglement didn't want to explain to their bosses the concept of supply chain issues. I immediately began searching for another position in my company, and very quickly found one that utilized some more of my niche skills with a very cool supervisor. I have ended up in a job that I have carte blanche to run as I see fit because I'm the only person with necessary experience to do so. But it doesn't end there. Throughout the pandemic, our team had been whittled down to maybe 9 of the original 13 people. Once I left, that left 8. 3 more followed suit and joined the remote help desk team, leaving 5 original team members. Fallout. Manglement decided at that time, since the primary focus was LCRs, that they could just hire a bunch of low-paid interns to fill the empty slots. Now the second whammy of this whole shebang is that recently our union had a new contract coming up, and Manglement apparently didn't take much time to read the new contract, because the contract forbids using interns to do the work of full-position union members. So now desktop team consists of 5 original full IT employees and 5 interns, who are only allowed to image computers. Their ticket queue still has tickets from June. 2. I went into a local cannabis dispensary to get a dual cartridge CBD THC vape pen that was rechargeable to check out. I'm in cancer treatment recovery and use CBD and THC to help with muscle soreness on longer rows of 10 km, and the product seemed to fit all the boxes for me. It was $60. I didn't have time to try it out that day, and the next one, I took a few vapes and it didn't seem to be working. I plugged it into a USB-C cable into a laptop, device did not come with one, and went back to working right next to it. A few minutes later, I noticed a smell of burning wire and looked down, and the disposable device is burning a hole in my desk, and smoke is coming out the end with the charger on it. The distillate was bubbling and pouring at the top. I removed it from the charger and let it cool down outside for a few minutes, and then head back to the dispensary. I explained the situation to the clerk and said it was smoldering and reeked of electrical wires burning, and he said it sounded like user error to him, and I should try a different charger for it. He said that they have multiple people with this issue, and it was always the same thing. He told me to take the device, which is a fire hazard at this point, and plug it back in, and it will be just fine. I asked him to write the instructions on the back of my receipt just for clarification, and I left with the pen. So I come home again, get a different charger, and plug it back in again to the same result, but this time I recorded it with my phone on and headed back to the store again. Clerk refused a return and said there was about a 20% chance of the product missing, and perhaps I just vaped it and could not afford another. He did offer me 10% off of another order. He said I was free to contact his manager if I wasn't satisfied, and I could deal with it myself. I took the receipt and the pen, and I came home and I did just that. I first hit the corporate website of the Canadian company, which is highly regulated by federal and provincial cannabis regulations in my country, and found the CEO and noted his email address. I then figured out the distributor for the child and safety protection housing for the devices in question, and noted his email address as well. Next was the email address to report faulty and defective devices to Health Canada, as well as the regulatory branch of the Consumer Product Protection Agency as well. I sent them all a very factual email stating nothing but facts, and I included conversations telling me, as a customer, to apply more electricity to an obviously defective device, as well as stating that a corporation with multiple reports of a faulty device are legally obligated to report and follow a lengthy investigation, when situations like this occur in this industry. It's highly regulated and for a reason. I even sent videos. They had not done this. I finished everything off about 11 p.m. last night and I sat back and waited. I have a 16-year-old son who knew of this situation, and on the way to school this morning, we discussed it, and he bet me $20 that no one would call about it, and I should just let it go. I decided that it would go the other way instead. About 9:30 a.m. I get an email from the Indigenous Cannabis Producers PR department stating that she was escalating my concerns, and someone would be contacting me shortly. I also received another email shortly after from the COO of the Child Protection and Safety Device Distributor, and she and the CEO wanted to discuss this situation with me as well. A call followed with the COO and CEO of the distributor device maker, as the shit was now getting real for them, knowing that everyone that needed to know now knew, and an investigation was imminent. I shared everything with them, and a call is being set up with the Chinese manufacturer to ask me questions about the device and circumstances of the failure, and I agreed to that as well. Lastly, the distributor offered to come by this afternoon to pick up the device, which is sitting safely outside in a box, as I was instructed to do so by the Consumer Safety Branch here in Ontario. She said she would include a few products and some swag for my efforts. Sadly, the retail store hasn't said a word, which leads me to believe that they really didn't give a shit, or else they were too scared to call me back. As for my kid, I'm getting $20, and he learns a valuable lesson of sometimes it's the principle over the $60 device. I suspect the staff won't be telling anyone else to look after things themselves. Dispensary rhymes with Flash & Co., and they need to teach their staff some manners in dealing with customers who think they are all potheads, trying to rip them off for $10 worth of THC vape. P.S. No, I did not steal or attempt to profit by the dispensary's ink pens. This was a THC CBD vape pen. I'm not a monster. Adding this, as a lot of people thought I was stealing Bic pens and trying to recharge said pens. 3. So, I'm sitting here at work listening to malicious compliance stories on a podcast. I just remembered this story from when I was about 15 years old and working my first job. This was in the mid-90s, so some of the memories are a little on the fuzzy side. I was 15 years old and able to finally work my first job. I took a job to work in the local daycare center in our town during the summer. I was working with some awesome preschool teachers, but there was one, Nancy. She was a complete and total bitch. She would always chew me out for not moving fast enough with getting a snack out to the kids, or being fast enough with taking a child to the bathroom. The playground was above ground and a preschool room was below ground. There were huge windows that, even though the walkway was partially blocking the view of the playground, you could still look down into the preschool room and see everything was going on. The kids usually went out to play after nap time, so usually around 3 or 4 p.m. before parent pickup. We had a nice little one that was about 2 or 3 that was still in pull-ups and potty training. She would have accidents sometimes, so she would have to be escorted to the bathroom. Nancy's favorite thing to bitch at me about was that I had to take this little girl to the bathroom to get changed. But I wasn't allowed to be by myself with her. I asked her why she didn't go take her down to the bathroom herself then, and her response to me was, "I can't leave you alone with the kids on the playground." I get it, a safety issue. So Nancy would send me to take the little girl to the bathroom, and then would yell at me because she wouldn't see me with her. She would bitch at me every day about this. My teenage brain was like, what the fuck, lady, how am I supposed to do my job? So I came up with a plan. One day, she asked me to take the little girl to the bathroom, and she kindly reminded me that I couldn't be out of view while taking her to the bathroom. Fine, no problem. So I took the little girl to the bathroom. I kept the bathroom door wide open, gave the little girl verbal instructions within earshot, easily enough for a 2 or 3-year-old to understand, and stood out in the classroom so she could see me. I told the girl to pull off the wet pants and throw away the pull-up, which she did like a bitco. Her words. Then I told her to come to me. She walked out into the empty classroom within eyesight of Nancy, on the playground, standing and staring down, watching me. I helped get her clean, pull up pants, and looked back up to the playground. Nancy was pissed. "Why did you do that? She needed to be taken care of in the bathroom." I just looked her in the eyes, all innocent. "But you told me I wasn't allowed to be alone with the kids. And you had to see me at all times. So that's what I did." I didn't get fired. The director of the preschool asked me what happened, and I don't remember her exact response, but I do remember there was a chuckle. Probably not very malicious, but malicious enough for a teenage girl that was super shy in the mid to late 90s. 4. This happened a few years ago. To set the scene, I was working at Target and Starbucks, and I was going to school full-time. I would work Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday from 6 to 2:30 at Target, then 3:30 to 11 at Starbucks. Tuesday I had class and worked Starbucks. Thursday I had a full day of classes, and then Sunday I worked at Target. I also don't drive, so I would be walking to and from both jobs and school. That means that my 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. days actually started at 5 a.m. and ended at 11:30. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday were 18-plus-hour days, all on my feet. Needless to say, I was tired, and I'm a hard worker, so I never slouched in my job, and usually worked harder than those around me. I accept that I'll usually be working harder than others. I don't usually mind, because it's who I am. Now, mostly it was fine, except the back-to-back 18-hour days on Friday, Saturday. Man, did that one hurt every week. And then at Starbucks, it started being the same closing shift. We'll call him Doofus and Closer. We'll call her Coke, because you guessed it, she was on Coke. Well, all the drugs, but the Coke made her hard to work with. Now, Coke wanted to be a supervisor, and Doofus was lazy, so Coke would do Doofus's job, and Doofus would do nothing. So that resulted in a very tired me having to do most of the closing tasks every Friday and Saturday by myself. They would leave me alone out front for hours at a time, doing all the cleaning, stocking, and prep by myself, while helping every customer in the cafe and drive-thru, while making all their drinks and food, again, alone. I'm normally a fun person to work with who jokes and keeps things light to help myself through my shifts. But this closing team was slowly killing me. So one weekend, a Saturday, I just stopped talking to Doofus and Coke and just went about my job. I was still pleasant AF to the customers because they weren't the problem, and still did more than my fair share of the work. I just did it silently. Now, because I was in a bad mood, so was everyone else. Doofus literally cornered me and told me I needed to change my attitude. I ignored him, and that was that. He only spoke to me to send me on breaks or tell me where to go when I got back from breaks. And those few words were said in less than pleasant tones. Didn't faze me, I just did my job. So the next weekend rolls around. It's earlier in the day, on Friday, maybe 6 p.m., so there are more people still working in the store, all of whom had issues with lazy Doofus and Coke, and knew how they were treating me later in the evening. So Doofus and Coke start in on not being helpful. So I start going quiet on them. Not rude, not disrespectful, not spiteful, just quiet. So Doofus again pulls me aside and says, and I quote, "I'm gonna need you to chip her up, or I'm gonna send you home." Oh boy. I said, okay, in the flattest tone I could muster. Walked back, grabbed my things and clocked out, and walked out of the store. This has nothing to do with the malicious compliance, but is a good part of the story. The Subway next door to me had their cameras down, so they had been hooking me up lately with free subs. So I stopped, got my mom and myself free sandwiches, and the wing place would give me free fries, so I picked up some fries, and then headed home to hang out with my mom, who I barely saw anymore because of my schedule. We watched a movie and I got to bed early. It was great. So one of my homie co-workers who was still working texted me about how badly Doofus was freaking out and how he was contacting my store manager about me walking out. But how proud he was of me for actually walking out. even though I just made his job harder by leaving them short-staffed. The aftermath. The next day I was heading out to work at Target. I stopped at my Starbucks to get my coffee on my way, as I always did. So I walked through the door and see my store manager coming out of the back room. He walks straight into the lobby towards me. Oh, fuck. Walks directly up to me and gives me a hug and asks if I'm okay. He said, "I know you wouldn't have walked out unless it was really bad." WTF, I love that man. I guess Doofus had been texting him, freaking out, and my store manager told him, "You can't threaten to send someone home and not expect them to leave." And basically told him he needs to deal with his repercussions. It was such a good feeling knowing my manager had my back. I would have gone to the ends of the earth for that man. And Doofus never threatened me with anything ever again, and even tiptoed around me for a while after that. Made sure Coke was working on her job, and made sure I wasn't working too much harder than everyone else. 5. When I was a student, I earned some extra money by working in a stationery shop in a university town. I only worked at weekends, and since there were no deliveries or post-lecture rushes, we usually had 3 of us on duty. At first it was me, Electron, a physics student with little time for humans, and Josh, the weekend manager. Josh was a surfer dude. Always really relaxed, knew that most of the job was bullshit, and freely told us that the only thing he liked was chatting with us and the customers. We developed a great group of repeat customers who liked the store being quieter, and thus able to talk to us about whatever problem they had. On that basis, Josh had agreed a policy whereby the weekend team did all the scheduled tasks when there were more staff on duty, but on weekends, all we did was filling empty shelves and sales. Unfortunately, Josh's main job as a water sports instructor was really taking off, and his days of selling paperclips were over. Neither I nor Electron had any interest in being responsible for keys, cash balancing, and explaining to sketchy folk why we'd stop selling those little resealable plastic bags. So we didn't inquire about the weekend manager job, and we weren't asked either. Apparently a weekday co-worker Susan wanted the hours. I liked Susan. She often took weekend shifts when one of us was out of town, and she blended in well with our team. But a storm was brewing. The owner had decided that weekend manager was a pointless job title, and that an experienced salesperson could handle the weekend crew. So when Susan was offered the opportunity to run the weekend team, it was not on the management pay scale. It was with a $1 an hour supplement. I genuinely did feel sorry for her. Neither me nor Electron would have taken on the responsibility for $8 more per shift. She negotiated him up to $1.50 an hour, but most importantly for her, agreed that though contractually she'd be a salesperson, at weekends she must be referred to as manager. I know because she spent the first month drilling this point home, and she printed out a special badge that said manager. Then got upset when the store's assistant manager, Alice, told her she wasn't allowed to wear it on weekdays. This created a rift that Alice never forgot. Alice told us when covering one weekend that Susan had also promised everyone that she would whip the weekend team into shape, and that Josh had allowed us to become lazy. Alice thought the whole thing was hilarious and said that it was pointless anyway. The owner had far bigger priorities than this store, and as long as we were ticking over a profit, he really couldn't care less about the sales volumes from one week to the next, or who worked what shift. To get Susan out of his hair, he had agreed that if she boosted sales in her first 2 months, she'd get a reward. And wouldn't you know, in the first 2 months, which happened to be a new academic year, sales were indeed boosted. She got a $25 gift voucher for another store he owned. And she told Electron and me that it was a clear example of how hard work pays off. We simply needed to apply ourselves and follow her instructions. One Sunday, I was talking to a student who wanted to buy a USB stick for their university work. I was talking about how to back up your data and that a single USB stick might not be sufficient. Electron was explaining something that I didn't understand to someone who I thought could not understand. Susan emerged from the small office at the back of the store where she has started to spend most of her time working on the system. It was very unclear what the system did or why it had worked so effortlessly during Josh's tenure and now required constant babysitting, but her time with the system was unavoidable and critical to our success.
"This shelf isn't full,"
she said to the open floor. I turned around and she was pointing at a shelf of notebooks. The owner had struck a killer deal on multiple pallets of garishly colored notebooks, and now we had thousands of them in the stockroom. The weekday team had put out 100 of them onto the shelf, but as they were cheap and selling quickly, a fairly noticeable gap had developed. Normally I'd grab some when I happened to go to the stockroom for something else, but that hadn't happened in a while. I went back to talking to the customer, and then she grabbed my shoulder and jerked it back.
"Bobby Bumblebee, when I ask a question, I expect a response."
The young guy I was talking to looked horrified and started to back away.
"Are you buying that?"
she asked him, pointing at the USB stick in his hands. He shook his head, muttered something apologetically, and put it back on the shelf before rushing out of the shop.
"Another time waster," she said to me. "No more wasting time on chat. You're either at the register selling or you're filling shelves. We've got plenty of notebooks in the stockroom, and there's no excuse for empty shelves. I expect every space filled."
She turned and marched back to the little office. She looked over at Electron and pointed at him.
"That goes for you too, Electron."
He looked back at her with a look of total confusion, but he usually did, so it didn't stand out. Then, as she slammed the office door behind her, a light bulb went off in my head. "Electron," I said, "did you hear her say every space?" He nodded and started to smile. He apologized to his customer for no longer being permitted to talk to them, and we started a Herculean tag-team effort in the stockroom. I brought out the first batch on the trolley and filled the notebook shelf. It looked pretty good. We were waiting on a shipment of printer paper, so there was a big gap in that section. Not anymore. I stacked those notebooks a yard high. I thought Susan might hear the noise and come out, but she was far too busy. Electron spent some time manning the register, but mostly we were filling shelves, until eventually we had filled the shelves. It looked like a kid had eaten a pack of highlighters and spewed across the entire store. I realized, though, that she'd said every space, not every shelf. So I created a tower near the office store. It was a majestic sight, almost 6 feet high in the center. Electron crowned it with a roll of sparkly glitter tape. To me, it was my Washington Monument. It was at this point that I heard it. What the hell? See, the one thing I knew that no one else did was that Alice was coming in at the end of the day to collect some paperwork. "Welcome to the unending notebook emporium," I said. I then told Alice how we had been berated earlier in the day, and that we were now following Sarah's strict instructions. Thankfully, Alice thought this was hilarious. She did ask, though, how Susan had failed to notice what we were doing. "She's been working on the system for the last 3 hours," I explained. Alice went up to the door, but rather than knocking on it, she just flung it open. Susan had been sitting in the office chair with her feet on the desk, reading a novel, but had jolted herself so violently that the chair had shot out from behind her, and she was now rolling around on the floor. Alice closed the shop, told Electron and me that she'd get things straightened out, and that we should report as usual the following weekend. I wish I could say that Susan was fired and that Alice had taken over the weekend management, but for some reason Alice and the store manager decided to give her a second chance. Susan did have to stay late to move all the notebooks spread across random shelves to my notebook tower, though I must say with less architectural flair than I had done. It still stood, although silently diminished a week later when I came back from my next shift. I have no idea what was said to Susan after the store closed, but she never wore the badge or shouted again. She also spent a lot more time on the floor and started to give us extremely clear instructions with absolutely no ambiguity. This was a great source of amusement for Electron, who occasionally played up to it, My personal favourite being when he asked if selling as much printer ink as possible meant he should lower the price to 1 cent. A few months later, both Electron and I finished our degrees and left. Neither of us worked in retail again. Electron went on to get a PhD in physics, and we are still in touch. But I still have no idea what he is talking about or what he does for a living. Alice later took over as a store manager, and Susan, as far as I can make out, left a couple of years after me, and now works as the assistant manager of a nearby supermarket. I like to think that she treats people better now, but who knows? At the very least, I hope that every time she sees a notebook, she remembers the day she spawned, the unending Notebook Emporium. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Revenge is Ice Cream, episode 181. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Before you go, if you could please boop the like button and throw the video at friends and family in as gentle a way as possible, possibly by sending them a link or something. And for those of you who have done so already, thank you very much. I greatly appreciate it. All right, this is... I don't know what day it is. Does it matter? Time's relative. Okay, I don't think we have any special shout-outs today, as far as I know, so let's move right along to Hellfreezer's question of the day. And today's question is... I should probably have asked this yesterday, but we'll do it today. Given that we're into the spooky season now, so if you could be a witch, a vampire, or a werewolf, which would you choose? Or maybe there's some other kind of supernatural creature you'd like to be, but those are the big three, so let me know which you choose in the description below. I would like to be a vampire, providing I could still occasionally nom on human food, but it didn't necessarily keep me alive. Just for the taste of that would be nice. Imagine being able to just scarf all the pizza you want. You don't have to worry about weight being an issue. You just have to chug down a bottle of Oneg after. Anyway, let me know what you think in a comment below. And with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.